And Martin?
Hey everyone, Martin Yip. I'm a senior manager of product marketing for Amazon EC2 as well.
And so earlier today, we heard from a lot from our leaders, and we talked a little bit before the break about sustainability. And one of the common threads that came through some of the leadership, especially if we talk about Dave Brown and then later Jeff and Anthony, was the important aspect of security and securing our customers' data. So security is not just something that we take lightly here. We're talking about how it impacts customers and how we want to protect that. So with us here today is JD Bean, who's going to talk to us a little bit about that security as well. So
JD, do you want to introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure, yeah. So hi, I am JD Bean. I am a principal security architect for Amazon EC2. And I may be a little biased. There are some really great jobs out there, but I have to say that I think mine is really among the tops.
I just want to say NAFA said the same thing. So
it's a great place to work.
Right?
For
There's a lot of different.
We all find our callings, right?
Yes.
So I get to focus in on the security aspects of Amazon EC2 and related services. I work on topics like the Nitro system and AWS Nitro Enclaves. And I get to do something really cool, I think. I get to spend about half of my time with the engineering teams who design and build and operate EC2 on the one hand, and the other half of my time working with customers of Amazon EC2, the folks who really matter, who build their own architectures on top of EC2 as a base technology.
And that's a great way to get feedback from both the engineering teams about the complexity that's out there, but also directly hearing from customers about what are their security needs and what's important to them security-wise, and you can respond.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the name of the game for me, and it really is an incredible opportunity every day to get to learn from, talk to, and work alongside our customers.
Yeah.
So as Art alluded to earlier today, Dave talked about some of the benefits of Nitro system. And some of the security benefits are some of the big things there. Can you describe the AWS Nitro system as a security feature and tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, right, as we heard from folks like Dave and Anthony earlier today, right, the Nitro system is the product of like a multi-year effort and journey we've taken in reimagining and re-implementing the way we provide virtualization, right? We've taken what used to run all on a single system host, right? Things like storage, networking, security, monitoring, orchestration, all of these services, and we've moved them in to custom-built hardware and software devices that really allow us to raise the bar on security for our customers, right? Security is our top priority at AWS, and I think that the topic of security really permeates the entire engineering process for all of our services. And Nitro, in my personal opinion, is I think one of the most advanced security technologies that we have ever produced at AWS.
And I think that's one reason we want to talk about it to everybody here, some of those security features, because security is not always for some people top of mind until there's a problem, right? And I think that now, one of the things we've done is with the Nitro system is make sure that it's embedded in that system, embedded right in everything that we do. So we're thinking about it for customers, if you will, and for our engineering team.
Security is built into AWS.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's not a bolt-on, right? It's not a second thought. It was the driving, I think, goal and principle behind and still is behind every development we've made in Nitro. I think security is everywhere you look, in every nook and cranny in the Nitro system.
Yeah. So maybe do we want to talk a little bit more about how security is in the Nitro system itself from the architecture? So maybe we could get a little more specific about it, right? Because we say it's embedded in the Nitro system. Anthony's talked about, physical access and, people can't break into a data center and stuff. But let's talk, while you're here, let's talk a little bit about the actual architecture that goes behind it and what it is we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. Though I have to say, you have to be careful what you ask for, Art. Once you get me started, it's a little hard to stop. So why don't I try and focus in on like 3 examples?
Sure.
I'll base that on actually, as a security professional, the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So why don't I start out with an example for availability that I think is really, really powerful in the Nitro system, but isn't something that a lot of customers would ever have a need to know about or experience. And that's our ability to update nearly every critical component throughout the Nitro system live while it's running without measurable impact to the customer's workload. That's incredible, right? Patch management is something that every security professional needs to think about. And with this type of functionality, we're able to update our systems and make sure they are running with the most up-to-date and most secure software possible without ever needing to impact a customer workload.
I think when you talk about patch management, I don't think there's anybody sitting out there. We're all sitting in front of laptops on a day-to-day basis, or smartphones and stuff, which are pushing security features to us. And so the interactivity a lot of people have to have with patch management can be very significant, and even greater if you're managing an IT group.
Absolutely.
So the fact that we're able to push these patches out because of the architecture and seamlessly continue the upgrades to the Nitro system without involvement of the customers, or without impacting the customers, I should say, is probably a better way, is a pretty significant thing that I think people should understand that's out there for that availability.
Yeah, absolutely, right? We're never needing to make a choice of, is now the right time to update.
And then actually this morning we heard from Jeff leaving instances running for 1,000 days, did he say?
Something like
hundreds
that,
hundreds of days at least, but not 1,000. Yeah, so pretty incredible that you can just leave it running and it'll just update behind the scenes.
Yeah, we should say that's not our preferred practice.
I will. I'll echo Anthony's comment there. You should still be updating the operating system of your instance and keeping that patched. But for the underlying virtualization system, we are rolling those updates out really very transparently to the customer.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk about the special Nitro card or the Nitro controller here a little bit.
Yeah. So the Nitro controller is a great example of integrity, right, in that CIA triad. And it does some really, really neat stuff. So the Nitro controller is a special Nitro card, right? It's one of those hardware computer devices that are providing the Nitro system entirely separate from the standard server mainboard that we would all kind of imagine. And what this chip can do, or this card can do, is that on system startup, it's gonna sort of validate and measure both its own boot process and all of the critical components, like even the low-level firmware devices throughout the entire system, to ensure that each of these devices and components are all running the exact validated configuration that we expect them to. So we can really trust all the way down to a hardware root of trust the integrity of the entire system.
And I think that word integrity is very important when it comes to keeping integrity and validating that root of trust as well, certainly from a customer perspective, like verification. And that's what this allows us to be able to do for customers, to prove that we are not booting without this data.
Yeah, and I should be specific here, right? This isn't just those Nitro cards or even just the Nitro controller. Thanks to another piece of hardware that we install on the system mainboard, right, which is called a Nitro security chip, we're actually able to extend that integrity and that validation onto the system mainboard kind of domain and cover the entire system from end to end.
Yeah, so I think we talked about two of those three pillars, right? So
Last
that
but not
leaves
least, yeah,
confidentiality.
Confidentiality, right? Okay. So confidentiality, this is another one that I guess really I think they're all pretty cool. But this is another one that I think is pretty neat, all right? So our Nitro cards for I/O, those are the devices that are providing the storage, whether that's EBS, which is network-based storage, or locally attached storage, right? Those are drives connected directly to the hardware. And also our network-based cards for VPC networking, all in slightly different ways are able to provide line rate encryption transparently and decryption of data for customer instances as it goes in and out of those instances.
I think I want to pause for a second on this, on talking about the encryption, because earlier when I was looking at the Twitch feed, we got a couple of questions about like how we do and how this encryption kind of happens here. So I think this is a great way a segue to just kind of briefly talk about how we're implementing the encryption here at the Nitro card level. as well, and the importance of doing it,
Yeah.
right?
I could definitely talk your ear off for hours on this. I will say, right, it's a little bit different for each of those three examples that I gave. But
Yeah.
I think the local instance storage one is a pretty good example, right? So there we've got local hard drives that are connected to a Nitro card that are themselves speaking directly to a customer EC2 instance or virtual machine. And what we're able to do is, thanks to to special purpose hardware accelerators that are designed specifically to perform this encryption, we're able to actually encrypt and decrypt the data as it moves through the Nitro card before it ever reaches, in this case we're talking encryption, before it ever reaches and is stored on the storage device, right? The NVMe or hard drive that's connected to the instance. And the fact that we're able to do that in line rate, right? What that means is that this process is totally transparent to customers. There's no impact on the encryption being slower or the drive rate being more jittery. What we've got actually is a thing that's on by default. There's not even a button to turn it off. It's just an extra layer of encryption that we're providing by default in the system. And that doesn't have to be your only layer, of course. So you can have additional layers on top, but we're providing that base encryption just as a default feature of using Instant Store.
And also the fact that we're able to provide this encryption without creating any impact on performance is really key, because later today we'll talk as well about Nitro SSDs, where latency is super important.
Yep.
So I think that gets to, Martin, the sensitivity that customers have
Yep.
to performance needs, and the fact that we're, even at the security level, we're making sure that we have a reduced impact.
Yep. So JD, you had spoken about encryption. Encryption is typically done at rest. It can be done in motion. But what about when customers want to protect their data while it's in processing, while they're being processed?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a topic that we definitely hear about from customers. And the way we think about that is with a term we call confidential computing, right? As you mentioned, encryption in transit has been a well-established technology with things like TLS. Encryption at rest, also a very well-established process. But this idea of trying to protect your data at the moment that it's being processed is really important for customers. What we've seen from customers is sort of two similar, related, but also distinct interests. And so we sort of break confidential computing, when we think about it, into two dimensions. On the one hand, you have sort of protection of sensitive code and data from the administrator or operator of your cloud infrastructure. In this case of EC2, AWS,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And on the other dimension, we have the idea of customers actually wanting to protect the confidentiality of sensitive data or code from their own software users or even their privileged administrators.
IT administrator or operators, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And what's really neat is that the Nitro system really, I think, provides an incredibly strong answer to the first dimension of confidential computing by default. Right, so the Nitro system is designed in such a way that we really made the isolation of customer data and customer instances from AWS extremely strong. Right, so take an instance running on a Nitro-based system. The system board itself is entirely isolated from the outside world. The only thing it communicates with is the Nitro cards. We don't have any type of interactive access mechanism whatsoever on the main system board, nor on the Nitro cards. All external interaction with either component of the system comes from authenticated, authorized, logged, audited APIs. And we've been very, very careful in designing these APIs to ensure that there's no mechanism for any system to access customer instance memory or data in encrypted EBS volumes or instance store. And this provides a really, really strong degree of isolation between cloud operators and customer instances. We really do treat customer data as being radioactive to us. right? We do not want to have any scenario in which any operator or system would ever come into contact with customer data that it is not supposed to have access to.
And connecting this back to some of the other topics, it also feels like everything is always, about some level of the word I seem to like of the day is efficiency. It's about, right? It's you have to optimize every element of the system to make sure that in this case it's prevented against data, some exposure of any, in this case we're talking about customers' data, but tying it back to before, you have to be efficient when you're optimizing your system as well for efficiency for the sustainability effort, or even how you choose your instances as well. So kind of this is another variation, I think, of that level of efficiency. It's making sure we are taking the time to make sure that we are efficiently looking at every component to prevent, to the best of our ability, of course, contact into the data.
Yeah, there just is no mechanism for it.
Yeah.
And it's funny, right? I think there's been a theme that you've sort of teased out here where we're not asking customers to make trade-offs between security and performance, right? We're giving them their cake and having them eat it too, which is fantastic.
Yes.
In the case of the Nitro system, I will say, right, we have designed a system that anyone I think who's built software knows that, right, logging into your production system and debugging it is often the quickest way,
That's right.
and the most efficient way to get the answers that you want. But I think we've made a very, very intentional choice in the way we've designed our system to eliminate that possibility, because we just don't feel comfortable with having even the possibility of some sort of customer data contact there.
But while it could be efficient, one could also say it could create more problems than it solves.
Yeah.
And that's our belief.
Exactly,
Right?
yes.
That could put an undue burden on a customer and on us. And
Absolutely.
we're trying to stay as far away from customer data as possible.
Yes,
That is
yes.
not, we're offering a service of our compute, and we're asking customers to trust us to use compute in the cloud with us and how to do that. And that's the key here that we're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, I guess a bit of a digression, right? We covered the first dimension, but
Right.
I should tell you guys, I guess, about the second dimension, because
absolutely.
we've also got a really cool technology there. And this is something I get to spend a lot of my time on, which is Nitro Enclaves. That's a tool to allow customers to build systems, right? I sometimes describe the Nitro system as being hermetically sealed, right? That idea of having no capacity for data to exit and come into contact with an administrator who administers the system. So for Nitro Enclaves, what we've enabled customers to do is to kind of design and build and deploy their own hermetic systems within their EC2 instances. And that's really neat, right? We're giving an opportunity for customers to have a constrained and limited environment, although also quite flexible and scalable, in which to process their most sensitive data that even their own administrators can't access.
So what are some of the use cases of Nitro Enclaves?
Well, it's a funny question, right? So on the one hand, right, the use cases are infinite, right? One of the things that I love about AWS and working with customers is that our customers are always finding use cases and building systems that I might not have thought about, right? So Nitro Enclaves is perfect for any type of sensitive data processing, and there's a lot of sensitive data in the world. Sometimes that could be like personally identifiable information or credit card numbers. And in those scenarios, right, you might want to put your pieces of your code that need to access that data in sort of a Nitro Enclave where it has that limited environment. You might want to be doing tokenization or detokenization. Another example is like sensitive credentials. So a good example of that is, right, sensitive keys, the type of keys, cryptographic keys that you need to sign something like a blockchain transaction. So we've got customers like Crypto.com that have really seen a lot of success in using Nitro Enclaves to ensure that those hypersensitive blockchain transaction processes are only occurring inside one of these isolated compute environments. Another one that I think is really really interesting, really pushes the boundaries of what I think was possible before Nitro Enclaves, is multi-party collaboration, which is many words,
Right.
but it's kind of a really cool concept. It's the idea of two or more parties that maybe each have their own data sets and want to combine those data sets together to derive some business benefit. They want to know if they share customers in common, things like that. But they don't trust each other to have direct access to each other's data sets. So the way that Nitro Enclaves can enable this to happen is using something called cryptographic attestation. Nitro Enclaves can allow those two untrusting parties to come together and to develop a common set of code and processing that they can both agree is appropriate and approved, and allow the data processing to occur only with that code inside an isolated environment that neither of the two parties can directly access, therefore maintaining the confidentiality of the data.
So then would the two parties just get the end result of the processing?
Yeah, and only the end
great way-
result that they've agreed is like
That's
appropriate.
really cool.
Yeah,
when
it's
you
really
think
cool.
about it.
Great way to collaborate and keep the privacy of each other's data.
And especially with more and more sensitive data. I mean, we're talking about an example here potentially of two customers, but this could be an company or whatever situation where you have data that you're coming up with that you need to do some operation on. So yeah, having access to a technology such as Nitro Enclaves is key to solving some of those issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been something that customers asked us for, right? They liked what we did with the Nitro system. They wanted to develop those architectures, within their own workloads, and it's been really incredible to see the use cases that customers have found for this technology.
Yeah. So today we talked a lot about the three pillars: confidentiality, integrity, and
availability.
And then we
CIA.
follow, and that's
CIA.
embedded into, you're right, CIA. Okay, easy acronym, I should remember better. And then we followed that up by talking a little bit about if there is a need for an isolated compute environment with the additional offering that we have of Nitro Enclaves. So one, we have CIA that's kind of, if you will, embedded into everything that we do. And then we have the Nitro Enclaves as an additional offering above and beyond that when customers needed this isolated environment. Is there anything else about security and compute that you think that customers should know about that either we didn't cover or there's a lot about security. We could be here all day on security alone.
Yeah, I did warn you. You probably shouldn't get me started. But no, I think really you covered it really well, Art. I think the Nitro system provides a tremendous bar raise for customer workload security. It really does enable some really great outcomes for customers. Nitro Enclaves is a great option that customers can adopt and build their workloads on. But I think that one of the most exciting things about the Nitro system is how much and how easy it is to benefit from those security and confidentiality guarantees just by using a Nitro-based instance.
Yeah, I think that the focus that we have on security at AWS is really, really important. It's both, we spend a lot of time talking about the price and performance and stuff like that, but customers need to be reassured that we take that security as well really important. So I want to thank you for coming out today to talk about that. I think this is a really great topic, and I too could also riff on this for quite some time as well. So I just want to thank you for coming as well, JD.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much for having me. And as I said at the outset, I love getting a chance to chat about this and share this message with our customers. So it's just been such a privilege.
Yeah, and I think next up is we're going to have a kind of hear directly from a customer, and I think that customer story is Splunk that we'll offer here. Kind of a cool customer story who customers taking advantage of many of the silicon offerings that we have. So that I think it'll be kind of interesting to hear from them.